This is Arab Talk on KPOO 89.5 FM in San Francisco. This is Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal. I'm Jess Hannam.
And I'm Jamal Dajani.
Jamal, it's been another kind of catastrophic week in Palestine and in the area. In the last week since we have broadcasted our last show, Israel has bombed Syria, has bombed Lebanon, has bombed Gaza, has continued to kill Palestinian civilians, and in a rather kind of Islamophobic and racist attack on religious worshipers, invaded the Al-Aqsa mosque and arrested Palestinian worshipers during Ramadan. Incredibly egregious, and finally getting worldwide condemnation for their religious persecution, in addition to denying Christian Palestinians the opportunity to religiously practice their freedom in Jerusalem. So it's been a very difficult time, obviously, in Palestine. The apartheid state continues to ratchet up things. Things are very chaotic right now. And in some ways, the media representation of what's happening in Palestine continues to be kind of embarrassing, to say the least, and very disgusting in terms of missing all the big picture and highlighting the so-called democracy protests. But we're going to talk all about that. We're going to talk about the attacks on worshipers at Al-Aqsa, the 75th anniversary of the Deir Yassin massacre that Israel committed against Palestinian civilians. We're going to also talk about AIPAC's attempt to cultivate, if you will, which is another nice way of saying control, Democrats. Now they're going after Democrats to get them to swing in favor of voting for the apartheid state. So we're going to cover all of that, obviously. There's a lot to cover. But before we do that, we're going to watch an interview you did with a Jewish Israeli activist and co-founder of Boycott Within. That's Ronnie Barkan. He's going to be talking about the upcoming trial at the Bristol Crown Court for the allegedly breaking into Elbit Systems headquarters in the UK. It's a very important case. We're going to watch this interview that you did with Ronnie Barkan.
That's right, Jess. Let's watch Ronnie. Last June, 9 activists from Palestine Action pleaded not guilty to charges of criminal damage and burglary at Bristol Crown Court in the UK. Their charges follow a direct action taken at the Bristol headquarters of Israel's largest arms company to commemorate Nakba Day on the 15th of May 2022. The 9 activists broke into Elbit's Bristol headquarters and barricaded themselves there. 2 activists, Ronnie Barkan and Stavit Sinai, who are both foreign nationals, were imprisoned since action and were granted bail at the plea hearing. Their conditions for bail involve surrendering their Israeli passports, a 10 p.m. curfew, electronic tag, and non-association with their co-defendants. One of the defendants, Ronnie Barkan, is joining us on Arab Talk. He's a longtime Jewish Israeli activist and math teacher and the co-founder of Boycott from Within. Welcome again to Arab Talk, Ronnie.
Hi, Jamal. Thanks for having me.
Let's begin with your upcoming trial. I know that you've been restricted to what you can comment on, so give us an update on the trial, when it's going to be taking place, and feel comfortable not to get into details.
So I look forward to the trial. It will take place in Bristol Crown Court on the 17th of April. Everyone is welcome. So that is in a couple of weeks from now. And I expect it to be an interesting trial. So I will not go too much into the details other than, you mentioned Boycott. Basically, there have been ongoing demonstrations across the UK for the past couple of years by a group called Palestine Action, due to sustained demonstrations and direct actions over the 10 sites owned by Elbit Systems, which is Israel's largest arms manufacturer. It used to have 10 sites in the UK. 2 of them have been permanently shut down since, due to these sustained actions. So I took part in such an action against the Elbit headquarters in Bristol. That was on Nakba Day last year. We have to remember that the Nakba is not only an historical event, it is an ongoing process whereby all these tools, technological tools, are key in upkeeping and maintaining this ongoing process of the Nakba against Palestinians, especially when we talk about Gaza. Gaza was built as a concentration camp in 1948 to house these surplus human beings, those who have been expelled from the Nakba region. And ever since, they are there caged, not allowed to go back to their home. And I will only refer to the recent Great March of Return that took place in Gaza, which was not only against the criminal and barbaric siege there, but also for their rights to return to their homes. And they are being controlled 24/7 by Elbit drones that are hovering overhead and bombing them once in a while, by unmanned land vehicles that are controlling them, which are fitted with machine guns and other types of technology, again, all Elbit made, and on and on. This is how the Nakba, the ethnic cleansing, and what amount of crimes against humanity, apartheid and genocide, are being carried out.
Talk in general, what does Palestine Action's mission and why it's targeting the Israeli weapons manufacturer, Elbit?
So, Elbit Systems, as mentioned, is Israel's largest arms manufacturer, and it is involved in all of these horrible crimes that I have mentioned, which amount to crimes against humanity. It is not even just involved as a subsidiary or as by proxy. They are actively on the ground taking part in these crimes. When we talk, to the extent where during the 51 days of assault on Gaza, called Protective Edge in 2014, they have introduced to the so-called war scene a premature drone, the Hermes 900, and that drone was key in the bombing of Gaza during these 51 days, where 551 children were murdered, where 89 families have been completely obliterated. And over the course of these 51 days, they introduced a drone that was not yet market ready, and they made it marketable over the course of this so-called war. Now, Elbit personnel were on the ground along with the Israeli Air Force, taking every takeoff and every landing. They were the ones flying the drones, while the Air Force crew were the ones dropping the bombs.
So let's move to what's happening in Tel Aviv, close to where you grew up in Ra'anana. Do you see something good coming out from these demonstrations?
I think it is a really interesting phenomenon. And not because of what we hear in the news, not because of this or that political discussion, but we have to look at it in a whole other lens, which is that this is this whole psychological issue. There are two groups with very different views about life and about their own identity. And this Netanyahu government, which is more explicit than any other in the past, has basically eroded or took away this veneer of normality and so-called democracy and on, this so-called liberalism that never existed in Israel, but there was always this veneer, this cover that people could basically shield themselves from actually looking at the real issues at hand. And this new government is much more explicit and much more honest about their Zionism. And that basically places all the others in the corner, and they are struggling. All those, the masses who are struggling at the moment against the Netanyahu regime, and specifically against the appointment of Ben Gvir, right now, today, there was a hearing in the Israeli Supreme Court about challenging the appointment of Ben Gvir. He represented himself, by the way, at the Supreme Court. So those who are challenging the Ben Gvir and Netanyahu regime, and those who are demonstrating out on the streets, they are demonstrating because they are not willing to admit the reality of what the Zionist race state is all about. They would like to maintain this facade of normality, this facade of liberalism, and that new regime just throws all of that away. So I made in the past a table comparing the Zionist propaganda with the reality. And the Zionist propaganda, which you hear all the time on Haaretz newspaper and 972 magazine and so on, this liberal Zionist propaganda, talks about Israel versus Palestine. It talks about the occupation of 67, not about the occupation of 48. It talks about, that as if we only tweak the situation, if we only overcome the occupation, that occupation of 67, then things would finally become better for Palestinians. But it is not like that. The issue does not revolve around 67, it revolves around 48. It is not about tweaking the situation. It is about abolishing a system of racial domination. It is, and the only way to move forward, the only way to really have democracy and equality is to abolish a system of racial supremacy and racial domination. And
before we get deep into this, you mentioned that the new Netanyahu's government, starting with Ben Gvir and also Smotrich, we didn't talk about him. Who are these guys and how have they risen to power so fast? All of a sudden, boom, they're in the news every day for people in the West. I'm not talking about in Palestine. No one has heard of them before.
So they were known all along in Israel. Just that maybe they haven't risen to power as much, but they are figures that have been known, and they were regarded as the extremists. And what we see over the past couple of decades is that the extreme, what was regarded as far right discourse in Israel, is becoming more and more normalized and mainstream. So if you remember, there were all these who were struggling for the rebuilding of the temple, the third temple, for example. Really crazy zealots and so on, and they have put together student groups in different campuses. They have had ministers who were supporting them all along. They have built up this support, and this type of discourse, which is, you could say that it is more founded in religious sentiment or pseudo-religious. It's about the building of the third temple and things like that, and this discourse has become more and more accepted in the mainstream. You can also see that in the media in Israel. The latest channel 14, was basically established as let's say a far-right channel, but it has become much more mainstream and it gets more and more popularity. And I think that those figures in Israel were known all along, but their language has become more and more mainstream over the time. So they were regarded as far-right. They were there even in the Knesset. If you remember Moshe Feigling, who was deputy speaker of the Knesset,
right,
who takes inspiration from people like Jabotinsky and so on. You had Michael Ben-Ari, who is the student of Kahane. He was in the Knesset. They were much more honest about their racism, about their Zionism, but they were still regarded as kind of a fringe movement within the parliament. Now they have become much more mainstream, but this is a process that we have been seeing over the past couple of decades, where, for example, those who were talking about the rebuilding of the third temple, religious fundamentalists,
We should explain rebuilding the third temple means the destruction of Al-Aqsa and the Dome of the Rock.
Destruction of Al-Aqsa and rebuilding of the third Jewish temple on top of it. Exactly. And it is, these are real extremists who are supporting it and with very weird views. But they have established student groups across the country, and their discourse has become more and more mainstream, which is crazy in itself. You have leading ministers from also past governments who have been supporting them all along. Now, those who I mentioned before, Feiglin and Ben Ali, I think it's very important to talk about their discourse, because Feiglin says, again, kind of disregarding this language of propaganda, Feiglin says, what is the difference between the city of Gaza and the city of Jaffa, as he calls it? He says the only difference is 19 years. Whatever we did to Jaffa, we have to do to Gaza. He says both are Jewish towns on the Mediterranean Sea. This is how he sees it, and the people who are living in Gaza should not be there. They should quit silently or agree to be subjugated, and if they raise their head, we will make them leave. People like Mikhail Ben Ali that I mentioned, when there was a discussion about the anti-BDS law that was, they wanted to legislate an anti-BDS law in the Knesset over a decade ago. And there was a heated discussion there. Ben Ali stood at the podium and he said, let me read to you. You are talking all the time about settlements, and they mean the West Bank settlements. And he is himself a settler. He says, I never evicted any Palestinian from my home, from my land. There was no Palestinian village or town where my house sits today. But let me read you a list of settlements. And then he starts alphabetically, and he goes through all this list of different kibbutzim and different towns inside 48, inside what is regarded as Israel proper. These are the actual settlements. They are built literally on top of and at the expense of Palestinians who have been expelled from there. So these voices were all along, even in the Knesset, but now they have become the mainstream. And that is a big issue for those who still want to point the finger at the settlements in the West Bank. Those who want to point the finger at the situation in the West Bank and say, this is the trouble, this is the problem that we have to deal with, not the actual foundational element of the Zionist state, which was built on racial supremacy and ethnic cleansing.
So the Israeli cabinet has recently approved Ben-Gvir's so-called National Guard plan. Critics are warning that this can be used, or it's about 2,000 forces, members of the force, will be used specifically against Palestinians and Palestinian citizens of Israel and anti-government demonstrators. Why did Netanyahu succumb to such a thing, to really making Ben-Gvir more powerful than before?
I think that the question that bothers me is, why did Netanyahu succumb to the possibility of Ben-Gvir taking over Netanyahu's role? Because Netanyahu is known to expunge anyone who stands in his way, who is some sort of a rival for his popularity. So I think that Netanyahu thinks, I'm just guessing here, that he can get more popularity at the moment by promoting Ben-Gvir's role. Also,
when you say popularity, obviously, like half the country is demonstrating against him. So when you mention gaining the popularity with the Kahanists, popularity with the settlers, whose popularity is he seeking?
It's an interesting phenomenon, and goes back to what I said about how people conceive themselves in Israel. It has nothing to do with Palestinians, and it has nothing to do whatsoever with what we regard as democratic values. It has to do with those who are Zionist, and unashamed of their racism, which is the entirety of the Netanyahu government, and those who are Zionist and feel that they are liberal and democratic and so on, and want to play a pseudo-democratic game. And there are clear distinctions between the two. And those who are Zionist and supposedly liberal and democratic, they're inconsistent in their views, and they are not liked by the other ones, the right wing, because they can see through their lies. Okay, the right wing can see through the lies of the so-called democratic tendencies, which have nothing to do with democracy and nothing to do with equality. So you have kind of this schism, and those who are demonstrating are really demonstrating to save their state. As far as they are concerned, they are demonstrating to save their cherished, basically their La La Land reality of the place that they live in. But they know that if Netanyahu carries on with his mission, the whole nature, the whole character of that state will change. They will no longer be able to tell themselves that they live in such a democracy. So when I talk about popularity, Netanyahu does not. There is some divide that cannot be overcome, that cannot be bridged. These two notions of whether one lives in a so-called liberal democracy or whether one is simply, a Zionist and says this is ours and this is all ours. And I think that this cannot be this divide cannot be overcome. So when I talk about popularity, I'm talking about the rest. And I think there Netanyahu is gaining more and more popularity.
So, well, there is a new poll that shows that Israelis prefer Gantz. This was released, I think, last week, that they prefer Gantz than Netanyahu as a prime minister in a head-to-head match. My first question is there a difference between the two? Also, is this poll accurate? That's the other thing. Someone had written that the Israeli left, represented by Gantz, always wins in polls but loses in elections.
Yeah. First of all, let's talk about Gantz. Gantz is known to have said, to have talked about the miracle of turning blood into money.
Wow.
Okay, this is what he talked about the way that the Israeli army is acting in Gaza, and where they teach the world about this miracle of turning blood into money. And he says that in an excellent film called The Lab, Yotam Feldman's film, about how basically the arms industry is the most profitable industry in Israel. And, so this is what Gantz stands for. Why do these so-called liberals support Gantz? Because it's not about Palestinians, it's about everything else. His politics is that which still tries to maintain this pseudo-liberal democratic character of Israel. I would argue with the poll, though. I would argue with the question of popularity. You said that maybe the polls say one thing, but the elections say something very different. And we have seen, how these elections happen over and over again. Why? Because there is pretty much a 50-50 mark between those two types of Zionists. Okay, let's forget about political parties. It's irrelevant. There are two types of Zionists. One are racist and proud of it. The others want to feel that they live in a democracy. And they are fighting, and there's about a 50-50 mark. And I said that I think you cannot really bridge between the two factions here. So Gantz represents one of them, even though he is very much supportive of bombing Gaza, and Netanyahu represents the other. I think my perception, my subjective perception, of course, is that over time, the overt Zionists, the racist Zionists, are becoming more and more popular. And you see that with the youth. You see, there is an iconic high school in Tel Aviv, which is known to quite well predict the next elections. They take polls there, and they are quite, they're probably better pollsters than the rest. And I know that when Ben-Gvir was there before the election, he was received with standing ovation, and they loved him there.
Wow.
So I would say that the youngsters, even in so-called liberal Tel Aviv, are more inclined to support Ben-Gvir than to oppose him.
This is very disappointing because I was mentioned last week during the anti-government demonstrations, Meir vote youth activists burned conscription warrants. They refused to serve the occupation and apartheid. And I thought this was encouraging, but you're saying the opposite.
Yes, you see, there are fringe groups like Meir vote, which, great. I mean, I'm all in favor of conscientious objectors. I am myself a conscientious objector. I've devoted many years to support other conscientious objectors. But we are, saying that there is a conscientious objector movement, for example, that is a lie in itself. There's no movement. There's a handful of activists. We all know each other by name. So the fact that it grows from 10 to 12, it doesn't mean that the movement is growing. It just means that there are a couple more people on board. So also I know that, I've seen some articles on 972 magazine where they love to embellish these fringe movements. And I support these fringe movements, but they are no more than fringe, trying to portray them as bigger than they actually are. So I know that there are some who actually, their slogan is, there's no democracy with apartheid. And I even saw some banners saying democracy, I don't know what they were saying exactly, but something like democracy from the river to the sea, which is a banner that I was holding, by the way, 12 years ago during the demonstrations. If you remember, there were, in the Arab Spring, there were also demonstrations in Tel Aviv and elsewhere. And again, there were masses on the street, totally apolitical. They were mostly against Netanyahu, but not supporting anything of substance. And there was a fringe group that I belonged to that we were trying to radicalize that movement. And it's true that we managed to radicalize it to a certain degree, and, even it doesn't matter right now, but like kind of changing the discourse a little bit. But so some people from that movement, the mass movement, also personally, their views have transformed over time because they saw those other who were more radical. But the bulk of it, they didn't want any such political discussion. They didn't want to involve Palestinians. They didn't want to discuss how do we actually reach democracy and equality. They only wanted to preserve their cherished race state with this facade of liberal democracy. So yeah, I mean, I think that the situation is quite similar. It is true that the numbers, there's massive amount of people on streets, and that is quite encouraging. It is encouraging because there may be a chance that the Netanyahu government will be toppled because of that. They're already talking about the serious effect that these things will have, the so-called democratic, the so-called judicial, how is it called in English? Judicial reform. They're saying that it will have an impact on the economy. At least they say 14 billion shekels a year for the next 3 years. They say that it could even amount to 48, and I remember the number, 48 billion shekels a year for the next years. So why? Because of the status of Israel around the world, because that there is going to be a brain drain, that people will leave to other places, especially obviously the more skilled, high tech and so on. Other companies will not want to invest in Israel because of, again, the changing image of that state. And I am in favor of all of that. I am in favor of transforming and pointing the finger at what the race state really is all about. So do these demonstrations have some important role? Yes, they do. Do they seek democracy? No, they don't.
Well, let's talk then about the elephant in the room, apartheid, which these demonstrations don't address. as you have articulated here. Israel's apologists deny that apartheid exists in Israel, despite all the evidence provided by international human rights organizations like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, Israel's own human rights organization, B'Tselem, and others. How did you reach this conclusion yourself that Israel is an apartheid state?
So we have to be very clear about what we mean by apartheid in the Zionist race state. It was built as a race state. It was built as an apartheid state. It is not only about the West Bank and Gaza, where the situation is unbearable. It's horrible. And there's clear apartheid, especially if you go to Hebron, Khalil, for example. It's very clear you have different everything. There's elements of what's called petty apartheid, which existed a lot in South Africa, where you have segregated everything. So yes, there is clear case of apartheid in the West Bank, where you even have two different legal systems for people that are based on their ethnicity. And then again, that's not the main part of apartheid. The most part of apartheid is what is happening inside what is regarded as Israel proper, or what we call Palestine 48, and especially so where it affects the refugees, meaning those who are in forced exile for the past 7 decades. So half of the Palestinian population are not even allowed to live on their land. They have been forcefully exiled and to this day are maintained in this position, denied the right to go back home for one and only one reason, because they belong to the wrong racial ethnic category. And everything about the foundation of the Zionist race state is about that, is about denying those who have been expelled from there to ever come back, and denying equal standing from everyone who remained on their land. This is how it was founded. This is how Israeli apartheid was founded, and it is very well defined in the law. This is why I define myself, or I present myself as a privileged Israeli Jew. Not because I regard myself as Israeli or Jewish, because this is my legal status in the Zionist state. My citizenship is Israeli. My nationality is quote-unquote Jewish. Nothing to do with religion, everything to do with supremacy according to the Zionist state. This is how they make the distinction between the people who are the privileged and have rights to those who are underprivileged and are denied rights. So 7 million people among the privileged group control the lives of another 14 million people, half of which are in forced exile for the past 7 decades. This is the situation. This is why there is apartheid, and I can go on and explain in detail all the mechanisms of apartheid. But it is not only in the West Bank and Gaza. Another thing that I challenge is this whole false terminology of referring to it as Jewish supremacy. I'm very much opposed to this false term and this misleading and dangerous term of Jewish supremacy. It is racial, ethnic supremacy. You can call it white supremacy if you like, because it fits, whiteness is a construct. It fits into the whole notion of white supremacy. It is definitely not quote-unquote Jewish supremacy. The Zionist state uses and abuses Judaism to justify itself, and it uses the term Jewish, like I said, to say that my nationality is quote-unquote Jewish. Not because of religion. They also have, by the way, another category called religion, where they define their population. So they have citizenship, nationality, and religion defined for each and every person. But the nationality, quote-unquote Jewish, is the most important part, because in the law, it says if X has nationality equals Jewish, then, they are entitled to the right of return, the law of return, and things like that, and all the other privileges that follow. So I challenge the term Jewish supremacy. I challenge many of those apartheid reports, which are very, very misleading or limiting in their scope of apartheid, because they only speak about, or mostly speak about, what is happening in the West Bank and Gaza. That includes the Tzana report, that includes the horrible Yesh Din report, which is could have just as well been written by the Israeli Foreign Ministry, because it is all about justifying what is happening inside Israel proper. And also the Human Rights Watch report, which they have, to their credit, they have done the work. They are just trying to minimize the apartheid within 48 and only focus on the apartheid in 67. So if you are reading the Human Rights Watch report and you want to get a sense of Israeli apartheid, just read it backwards. Every chapter, start from the bottom and read to the top. Then you'll get a better sense of apartheid. But in their infographic, for example, they show a situation between 7 million Israelis and 7 million Palestinians, and just conveniently erase off the face of the earth another 7 million Palestinians who are in forced exile, refugees. That is absolutely unacceptable. So there are a few good reports, the UN report on apartheid, the Amnesty report, and the latest Al-Aqsa report. These are the ones that we refer to when speaking about Israeli apartheid.
Ronnie Barkan, thank you for coming on Arab Talk, and I want to wish you the best of luck in your upcoming trial. And definitely we want to hear, hopefully, the good news that, we'll wait and see so we can congratulate you again in person.
Thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to the trial. Please keep posted.
That's the voice and the face of Ronnie Barkan. He's the co-founder of Boycott Within, discussing the upcoming trial at the Bristol Crown Court for the alleged breaking into Elbit systems. It seems like, Jamal, the anti-Zionist protesters in UK are extremely active based on what Ronnie is saying, but this trial could have very significant consequences for the movement in the United Kingdom.
Well, other trials have gone through, and actually the activists were exonerated. So hopefully Ronnie and others will be exonerated. I mean, think about it, Jess. This is Israel's largest weapons manufacturer. I mean, these weapons, and they are manufacturing these in the UK. They also manufacture these weapons elsewhere and partner with other weapons manufacturers to do what? They manufacture drones that they use to kill Palestinians in Gaza and other weapons. And so these are activists. And as you've mentioned earlier, Ronnie is a Jewish Israeli. He's the co-founder of Boycott from Within. And he and others go from, I guess, factories to other factories to disrupt their production and highlight I mean, obviously the main reason is to highlight and bring media and attention to these manufacturers who happen to be sometimes in a lovely picturesque town in the UK or another town somewhere else in Europe, and no one knows what they're doing behind these brick walls. They are creating killing machines. And so kudos to him. He also talked about the makeup of Israel's new fascist government, which and its plans to expand the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. So moving on, of course, to the big story this week, at least for us, I don't know for others, and how it was interpreted. You said something very important, which is how the media covered it, But just to kind of maybe break it down a little bit, which is, the attacks of Israeli border police on Palestinian worshippers following the Taraweeh night prayers. And it's important to explain this because the Hasbaristas and their surrogates in the Western media try to say that these, the Palestinians were hiding in these mosques and they're hiding weapons and trying to disrupt things. And why are they staying late at night? Like now, they want to lecture basically Muslims how to pray, right?
Right. Why are you praying at night? Right.
And then, I don't know if you saw this video, but then when they take a break and you see them outside the mosque playing football, they put this video, a video, shot from an Israeli drone saying, look, they're desecrating the mosque. They're not there to pray. They're playing football, right? I mean, they can't make up their mind. Are they there to disrupt things and hide weapons, or are they to entertain themselves, or are they there to pray? And I grew up going to a Catholic school, and we had a church and everything, and we used to play outside the church all the time. All the kids,
Well, of course, you play in any open courtyard in Jerusalem, Jamal. Where it doesn't matter. Whenever the space is at a premium, and you play football in any open courtyard. Come on.
So what the media does not explain is that after Muslims fast from sunrise to sundown, and then they break their fast, many of them go to mosques and they do two things. One of them is Salat al-Taraweeh, that's the prayer after in the evening prayer. And then there is something else called tikaf, which is non-mandatory, but a religious act that is common during Ramadan and involves staying inside mosque overnight to pray, reflect, and recite the Quran.
Right.
And so now the Israelis, every single year, I mean, aside, I didn't even get started that they prevent a large segment of the population from going there because they put checkpoints and harass men under the age of 40 and prevent them from going there. But anyway, those who make it there, they stay. Some of them stay overnight. Some of them stay overnight to pray the dawn prayer and so forth. And that's the i'tikaf, which is basically spending that evening in spirituality and prayer. And now we have people from whether Israelis or other media outlets saying, yeah, why are they staying in the mosque? They shouldn't be staying in the mosque. And they want to control, basically, who goes in and who comes out.
Well, Jamal, that's a really great explanation and description of what happened. But let's keep in mind the Border Patrol invaded, harassed, and tried to interrupt religious prayers at Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest site in Islam in Jerusalem, almost every single night of Ramadan. They went in there. They desecrated the Al-Aqsa. They were the ones that went in. And I just want to, you tweeted this amazing picture, and I hope many of our viewers and listeners got a chance to see this. Palestinian men face down, handcuffed behind their back in the middle of Al-Aqsa Mosque during the middle of Ramadan, attempting to exercise their right to pray in Al-Aqsa Mosque. It is an incredible and extraordinary provocation, Jamal. And how is the media portraying this? This is the so-called democracy, this great democracy in the Middle East, the apartheid state, arresting and harassing worshipers during the holiest month for Muslims all over the world in the third holiest site. What the coverage was abysmal, Jamal. I didn't see that picture of the young Palestinian men being held face down, handcuffed behind their backs in the middle of a mosque. That wasn't on the mainstream media here. That wasn't what was portrayed. It was protecting the, I don't know what, protecting what, Jamal, but the mainstream media seems to have missed this one again.
Well, one word describes it is disgusting. And another word that they use time and time again is clashes. Clashes happen, like clashes between two armies, clashes between two factions. I don't know.
Well, now it's clashes between worshipers and military.
It's a one-sided clashes. When you go and invade a mosque with full gear and shoot rubber bullets and tear gas and sound explosives,
sound grenades, right?
And I have to say, and they don't even explain the motives. For example, the clashes on that Tuesday, the infamous Tuesday, why did it happen? Because early on Wednesday morning, Israeli forces, I'm sorry, it was early in the morning on Wednesday, it started in the evening, and this time they wanted to do it. No one told you why. Because they wanted to get rid of all the Muslims at Al-Aqsa in order to pave the way for Israeli settler incursions, which began at 7 a.m. because they provide protection to them. So they wanted to empty out the mosque. This is an Islamic mosque in the midst of Ramadan. The worshippers are like basically all over the place. They wanted to empty it by force. So you had groups, and I named some of these groups. Like one of them, these are the groups that that Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and others belong to, the Temple Mount groups, which advocate the destruction of Al-Aqsa. And the day before, you could look at their communications, they have called for mass stormings throughout the week-long Passover. You could see on video Ben-Gvir telling them, go there, take over Al-Aqsa. I mean, he is like inciting them and so forth. And that's why you had that so-called clashes that happened.
Right. So let me ask you a question, Jamal. What would happen in the United States if the U.S. military or a police force raided a Catholic church during Easter and arrested, shot people, shot rubber bullets, and put people face down? Do you think that would make the news in any way, shape, form? I mean, we need to play this kind of imaginative kind of construction, because people lose sight of the fact that these were religious worshipers during a extremely holy month, and the third holiest month of the year, being attacked by a state military. And if you use that same structure and you apply it to any other country in the world, Jamal, it would call for international condemnation. And we saw silence in the Western media about this. We saw some, as you said,
only silence. They basically distort the story.
Well, they did state they supported the Israeli narrative of somehow clashes.
And they don't give it context. Like, why would Palestinians, for example, protect the mosque? They don't tell you, for example, that Palestinians fear that this is the first step to basically to lay the groundwork for the mosque to be divided. This is the first step. I'm not even talking about the destruction, because that's the ultimate goal for this group movement. But basically, they want to divide it between Muslims and Jews, similar to how the Ibrahimi Mosque in Hebron was divided in the 1990s. And what was the trigger point to divide the Ibrahimi Mosque? Was the massacre by the infamous massacre of Baruch Goldstein, the American from Brooklyn, New York, who went there and massacred Palestinians, and then they shut down the mosque. They took that was a pretext. They shut down the mosque for a few days, and then later on, they put barricades, and now they divided it into two sections, and that is the plan. I mean, that's maybe the Israeli government plan, but the current Israeli government plan goes above and beyond this. I think they don't want to even divide it. They want to destroy it.
They want to take it over. They want to destroy it and take it over.
Yeah,
they want to take over the space.
You see Smotrich posting the map of so-called Greater Israel, which stretches all over historic Palestine, including Jordan, including parts of Syria and Lebanon. And you see them taking pictures of the Wailing Wall and canceling the picture of the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque.
Yeah, I mean, it's unbelievable. And on top of it, Jamal, we don't have time to talk about this, but today Smotrich and Ben-Gvir are leading, tens of thousands of illegal colonial settlers to an evacuated illegal colonial settlement, calling on the Netanyahu government to repopulate, historic Palestine, repopulate the West Bank with illegal colonial settlers. They're protesting right now, Jamal, as we speak.
Yeah,
so the situation,
I just want to end this because we want to move to other things, but just, we're not even midway in Ramadan. Last year, 170 people were wounded because of this action. More than 300 Palestinians were arrested in raids during Ramadan on mosques. And in May 2021, hundreds of Palestinians were injured after Israeli forces stormed the compound and attacked worshippers during Ramadan. The same story. This led to also further incursions into occupied East Jerusalem. For example, the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah, which sparked a major Israeli assault on besieged Gaza, killing 256 Palestinians. Many of them were women and children. So they just repeat the same thing, and then people act so surprised. Oh, what's going on?
But it's headed in the same direction, Jamal, and the world is looking away. The world is giving the apartheid state yet another pass. We're in a crisis situation again, crisis after crisis, of this situation, and a ratcheting up of the aggression of the apartheid state against, worshipers. So I'm afraid that things, as you said, it's halfway towards Ramadan. We had Easter this last Sunday in Jerusalem. We have the Orthodox Easter coming up this Sunday. Things are very, very bad right now. Things are bad in Palestine in general, Jamal, but right now, because of the confluence of Easter and Ramadan at the same time, things are especially bad. I anticipate when we're broadcasting next week, we're going to have more bad news from this situation.
Well, I can guarantee you the more bad news, if nothing happens at Al-Aqsa Mosque, is that Christians will be prevented from going into Jerusalem, from Bethlehem into Jerusalem,
exactly.
From other places in the West Bank, because it happens every year. Or they allow only a fraction of them and say, look, there is freedom of religion practice. But, and then they don't Jewish, show you, show you the checkpoint at Bethlehem, where thousands of Christian Palestinians are trying to go to pray at, for the festivities at the sepulchre. I mean, they shut down. They shut down the entire old city. Actually, I've been there. I've seen it. You have to have, only a small fraction of people can go in to partake in these festivities. So this, anyway, we're talking about this, and at the same time, this is the 75th anniversary of the Deir Yassin massacre, where 75 years ago, just Zionist militias tore through Palestinian villages, massacring the villages and expelling those who remained alive to clear the way for the creation of the State of Israel. An estimated 15,000 Palestinians were killed, and some 750,000 were pushed out of their homes to live as refugees in other parts of Palestine or neighboring countries.
Yeah, Jamal, it's hard to believe that it's been 75 years. There are still a handful of survivors from that time, 75 years ago, obviously mostly children at the time who have grown up. But it's a scar on the consciousness of Palestinians all over the world that so many people were massacred in their homes. And it was the start of the kind of atrocious Nakba that occurred, from that time on for the following number of months and years, where that number of Palestinians was expelled. It's hard to believe, Jamal, that it's been 75 years and the pain is still there.
The pain is still there. And more we find out about this massacre, how on April 9, 1948, just basically weeks before the creation of the State of Israel, members of the Irgun and Stern gang Zionist militias attacked the village of Deir Yassin, killing 107 Palestinians. Just many of those people slaughtered, from those who were tied to trees and burned to death, to those lined up against a wall and shot by submachine guns, were women, children, and elderly, and many of them were thrown inside a well. And so history seems to be repeating itself. Yes. In a way, and that's why they say why Palestinians are so frustrated. Why are they so worried? When you remember what happened 75 years ago and is still ongoing, and we're seeing it on a daily basis, and it's important. Like people think, why was it so important, that massacre? Why does it matter to this day?
Well, it matters to this day for all the reasons we've just said. This is the historical connection between 75 years ago, Jamal, and the massacre of Palestinians and the displacement of Palestinians to where we are today. There's an uninterrupted line from Deir Yassin to where we are today. And it keeps getting worse. And that's why the media representation of what's happening now is so disgusting, because you're not hearing about Deir Yassin. You're hearing about clashes. And what we're going to do is continue to remember those who perished at the hands of these militia, and those whose memory that will be with us forever. Obviously,
so here is the thing about that. Just first, the Zionists tried to deny it, and they denied it for many years. And then the revisionist Zionists, they started to say that this was a mistake, that this happened. And I just want to answer, because I took this quote from Ilan Pappé, who wrote the famous book, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, because they were saying, and he said, Deir Yassin was no mistake, there was no mistake. Depopulating Palestine was not a consequential war event, but a carefully planned strategy, otherwise known as Plan Dalit, which was authorized by the Israeli leader at the time, Ben Gurion, in March 1948. Pape, he wrote that in his book. Operation Nachshon was, in fact, the first step in the plan. So this was carefully planned, and that's why when people look at it and they see what's happening at Al-Aqsa, and they see what's happening at Sheikh Jarrah, and they see what's happening in Hebron, and they say, that's why when Palestinians, you ask them, they say, the ethnic cleansing has never stopped.
That's right. And that's why our last topic is also very important, because, Jamal, last week we reported on a change among Democrats. Their sentiment is becoming increasingly more Palestinian, pro-Palestinian. So what a surprise about AIPAC, who has traditionally, Jamal, as you know, focused its attention on right-wing extremists, Republicans, and more conservative elements of Congress. It seems like AIPAC is beginning to see a different light.
Well, definitely. I mean, AIPAC, and when we think about AIPAC, you have to think about, they have now weaponized its super PAC, United Democracy Project, to be basically, so we don't get deceived, because many people say, well, AIPAC really, it's an advocacy group, but they don't contribute to elections. They don't put money. So now that's not the case. So it's all out in the open. They have their super PAC, and with that super PAC, they are spending millions of dollars on misleading attack ads, often accusing Democrats and the recent thing, like, for example, most recently, Summer Lee and Jessica Cineros and Nina Turner and Andy Levin and Donna Edwards and others of insufficient. They changed their tactic. They no longer say, they're not pro-Israel, they're anti-Israel, which was the case, like they label you, or even being an anti-Semite. Now what they're saying to you, that you are not loyal to the Democratic Party. You're not
loyal enough.
Exactly. And that's how they go after you. Well, in the case of the first case I've mentioned, Summer Lee, they couldn't beat her.
Right.
So it doesn't mean that all that money that they are spending, the millions of dollars that they're spending, is working. And then you've mentioned that briefly, is they're now suffering from this anxiety attack, because the recent polls, the Gallup poll, shows that especially young Democrats support the Palestinian cause and no longer support Israel. So they're panicking. So they don't know where to throw their money, which direction they should, put it and concentrate it on. And with that, they're becoming very vicious at the same time.
Right. And do you know who their new poster child is for Democrats promoting pro-Israel, more pro-Israel stances? Can you guess?
I don't have to guess far.
Do you want to guess?
Jeffries?
Guess who their poster child is, who they've... Well, yeah, there's Hakeem Jeffries, of course.
Hakeem Jeffries, of course, he's the head of...
He's the minority leader, but they've also brought in Andrew Cuomo to help.
Oh, yeah. We spoke, exactly. Yeah, I actually didn't go there because I think he's insignificant and he's a big loser, and not to mention that his sexual troubles that they're trying to whitewash for him.
But this
and
is
the
how
lawsuits.
Right, but this is how they rehabilitate politicians.
I congratulate them wholeheartedly. If he's their poster child, someone who has been accused of rape and sexual harassment
and lost his position.
Lost his position, they want to bring him back, and he is the champion of their cause. Good luck.
Good luck. And we say good luck to Andrew Cuomo and Hakeem Jeffries for supporting a lost cause and going against the majority of what young Democrats believe in these days.
You've been listening to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco 89.5 FM. Go to our website, arabtalkradio.com, to download the latest shows, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week.